Welcome to Building Better Communities with Bob Hart. Today on the podcast, Bob has invited industry veteran Ethan Penner. The conversation will be about how Ethan became a Wall Street legend and is considered the father of CMBS. He is an innovator and philosopher who also just happens to be the author of the recently released book, Greatness is a Choice. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the enlightening conversation about how Ethan is working to build better communities today.
Welcome to Building Better Communities with Bob Hart. And here is Bob Hart.
Ethan, thank you for introducing me to my podcast. It's so great to have you. You look well.
Thank you.
You've just been through a little life circumstance, getting a new knee, I heard.
Yeah, it's been a very hard, challenging, and interesting 15 months of 3 major surgeries in 15 months. Hip, heart, knee, after having none really my whole life.
And you're still smiling. It's amazing.
I'm still smiling. Yeah, I'm a very lucky man.
Well, you've got a good support system, and I think you appreciate things that are good in this world. And even though you're in a little pain right now, I think you can see the other side. So welcome. Thanks for coming all the way over here to do this with me. I really appreciate it. I've known Ethan now for almost 20 years, and although we don't see each other all the time, when we do see each other, it's usually something fun and epic. Hope to make this that as well. So Ethan, we have a lot of younger viewers in the real estate industry that, in addition to the more senior people, are always looking for, how did this person that Bob is talking to achieve what they did? You know, how did they really decide that?
Yeah.
And you're a little unusual in the sense that you really found direction that led to leadership and greatness very early in your career.
Super early, yeah. I've been chasing my own ghost for a long time. Because I had success very early.
So it really started in the 80s when you first entered the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, I had great success on Wall Street in the 80s and mid 80s, and then kind of epic success on Wall Street in the 90s. And I was only in my 20s and 30s, you know. So by the time I was 38, I was basically done, if you will, you know, like with that phase of my life and my career. And I reflect upon it a lot because it was almost like a different life, you know, like my lives have been, you know, when you get to be a certain age, your life becomes like chapters that are almost distinct from one another, and it's interesting to think about things like that.
So you were a trader, a debt trader on Wall Street?
I kind of came to mortgage securitization. Securitization was brand new right around the time I kind of came out of school.
You were there early.
So I was like one of the very Ranieri was in the Ranieri and Larry Fink, who now runs BlackRock, were really the two pioneers of securitization, and it happened in single-family mortgages. And I came in the next class. So like I was in the next class behind Fink and Ranieri.
You popularized it.
Yeah, well, I did for commercial real estate. So I'm credited with having created the CMBS business, and I did. And it was a joyful, challenging journey. And there's a lot I could definitely share with young listeners today about like what I did that I think might have led me to that path. A lot of times, I'm going to say this though, if we were talking about the young listeners today, I think young people, not just young real estate people, but young people today are in a very different spot, and I think generally not as optimistic about their futures and the potential that exists for them as our generation was when we came of age in the early 80s, right? When we came of age in the early 80s, even though it was a very bad recession, like I came out of college, people...
When did you graduate?
I graduated 82.
From undergrad?
Yeah, undergrad.
And that was the end of the Reagan, the beginning of the Reagan era with high inflation.
So like people today talk about, you know, the problems caused by a 4.60 10-year treasury. In 1982, the 10-year treasury was 15.65.
And mortgage rates were what, 18?
No, mortgage rates were like 14. You couldn't really get a mortgage, but they were like 14, because no one believed. You know, it was was a kind of a crazy time. People didn't really understand finance. Finance was very, I'll say, technology and sophistication hadn't yet permeated fixed income.
Algorithmic computers were not really
options-based pricing didn't even exist back then. So the level of financial sophistication was quite low. And then Ranieri and Fink and others like me kind of came in, and all of a sudden, securitization and the trading of securitized products in the fixed income world made fixed income the centerpiece of Wall Street, when before it had been nothing really.
So really, in call it 30 plus years ago, you had traditional bank debt, you had insurance company originated debt. There were no debt funds at that time.
No, none.
So CMBS was really the vanguard of the next phase of Wall Street type debt.
CMBS, so I created CMBS. Look, I'm an entrepreneur. And every entrepreneur, and I would say everyone should think of themselves as entrepreneurs in the sense I'm going to explain it.
Well, you're unique in the sense that you were involved with a Japanese company.
Well, I found them.
They found me. Tends to move slow.
Well, so I'll tell you how that worked out.
Yeah.
But I'm not that way. As you know, I'm a very entrepreneurial guy. And one of the things that I think every good entrepreneur does, whether you're in a company or not in a company, you could still be an entrepreneur and think like an entrepreneur. And that is to ask the question, what can I do with my package of skills that could move the needle, that could make a difference, that could bring something to the world that doesn't really exist today, that could meet a need that's not being met. So I always think that way. And so I found myself looking at the commercial real estate arena in the early 1990s. And you think about office today. Like office today, you basically can't get a loan. Like no one, if you say, hey, I need a loan on an office building.
There's no herd anymore for office.
There's almost no lenders, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's how everything in commercial real estate was, from apartments to hotels to office to warehouse to shopping centers and malls. There were no lenders because, as you said, the only two lenders in the 80s were banks and insurance companies.
Pretty much.
And international banks.
Yeah.
And all at once, because of the market had peaked because of overfunding, and then it started to go down and people started to lose money, and regulators essentially put the kibosh on commercial real estate. And so when you're in a regulated lender, you're in an on-off switch situation, right? The regulator says on or the regulator says off, and everyone goes in the same direction.
Well, we had just gone through the RTC crisis.
Yes. Well, then we're in the midst of that, really.
Yeah, 92 to 94.
89 to 92, really.
Ah.
And so that caused panic around real estate and losses around real estate. And the regulators turned the switch off for all regulated lenders. And so if you found yourself, which every borrower in America was, in a situation where you had a loan that ballooned and you needed to refi it, you'd call your lender and the lender would say, listen, maybe I'll give you a 6-month or a 1-year extension, but I can't do more than that. And then no one would give you a loan. So in that moment, it didn't matter. You could have had the best real estate in the best city. You could have had a 50% loan to value loan on 10 cap valuations, cash flow, everything's in place. You couldn't get a lender to make a loan. So then I said, wow, there's this unmet need I've never seen a larger unmet need. You have an entire industry that's dependent upon refinancings and no one's there. And I realized, having grown up in the securitization market, that the bond market was always there, because the bond market is very different than the regulated lender market. It's not an on-off switch. The bond market buys bonds, it just price moves, right?
Yeah, whether it's good day or bad.
It's always on, it's just the price moves.
Right.
So I said, if I could build a bridge to bring this always on money to this industry that's dying for this money, I'll be rewarded pretty well. I'll served, solve for a pretty big unmet need.
But the originator could get trounced if they, the paper is too low on interest.
Well, if you didn't hedge right, or if the market moved against you, or if you made bad credit decisions, there's a whole lot of risks, as are in every business. But
you made the loans as well as Nomura was
right.
issuing the paper.
I started off actually before Nomura. So I was at Morgan Stanley, where I had run mortgage finance, and before that trading. And I left Morgan Stanley because of this dislocation in commercial real estate. And like most big financial companies, they didn't want any part of commercial real estate. They were scared of it. And so I left for that reason, and I got backed by Cargill. And Cargill, I cut an incredibly entrepreneurial deal with Cargill. So if you want to hear a great entrepreneurial deal, I'm sitting with Cargill, and I said, okay, listen, here's the deal I'll propose. We agreed we're going to do business together. They were going to fund whatever I was doing, which initially was to bid on pools of RTC distressed loans, but ultimately
Cargill was at the time the largest private company in America.
Yes, they were, and they had a financial division who I was dealing with.
Right.
And I swung their interest to follow me into this void of commercial mortgage lending and securitization, and they loved the idea. And I said to them, okay, so we're going to go out and make loans. It'll be $50 million loans, $100 million loans, and we're going to get them. I'll get them rated, and then we'll sell them as bonds. Nobody ever did this before, and they said fine. And I said, well, listen, I'm 29 or 30 years old. I'm worth $1 million. I'll put my entire net worth in every deal, junior to your money. So if there's any losses, I bear them 100%.
So you're going to take the first loss position?
Yes. I said, so I'll put $1 million, my entire net worth, liquid net worth, junior to your position, and we'll both get an 8% return on our money, and then split profits 50-50. And I said, some of the deals we're going to do are going to be $100 million. You're putting in $99 million, I'm putting in $1 million, but my $1 million is going to be much more meaningful to me than the $99 million will be to you. And without any pushback at all, they said, done. And so I had this deal with Cargill, which was a pretty good entrepreneur's deal. And we did about 3 or 4 or 5 fairly significant commercial real estate loans that became the first securitizations. They weren't called CMBS then, but they were the beginnings.
Were you levering the paper though?
No, I would take their, let's say it was a $100 million loan on, let's say, a portfolio of 5 shopping centers.
Oh, and recirculate the money.
I'd make the loan.
Yeah.
I'd then own the loan. I'd go to the rating agencies, get it rated, and then take those rated bonds and sell them to bond buyers. And that was the beginning of CMBS. So I had done that with Cargill's money and backing for about 9 months, and then someone introduced me to someone at Nomura. I didn't know anyone at Nomura, but a friend of mine.
Who were the market makers then for the paper?
There were no market makers.
So who was selling it?
Me. Remember, I came from Morgan Stanley. I ran mortgage finance.
So the same desk that was originating.
Yeah.
I knew the same desk that was selling.
I was doing everything.
Wow.
Yeah. So then I got introduced to someone at Nomura, and at the time Nomura, even though they'd been in the U.S. for 75 years, they'd never made a profit in their 75 years in the U.S., and they made a big splash and hired a fairly legendary Wall Street guy to be their CEO, a guy named Max Chapman, who ran Kidder Peabody when GE Capital bought Kidder Peabody. And Max had a right-hand guy, and they met me through some just friend circumstances, and they fell in love with what I was doing in the business I was building. And we negotiated a deal, and I said, listen, I don't want to work for a Japanese company. They're bureaucratic,
Well, they move slowly.
I said, so here's the deal. I'm going to create my own company. You want to be in this game? You give me $500 million to start, and I run that business. I don't report to anyone.
That would be like $2 or $3 billion today.
Right, I said, so I don't report to anybody. I mean, I control all capital commitment decisions. I control all hiring and firing. You could fire me anytime you want, but as long as I'm still here running the show.
So you had full discretion?
I had full discretion.
In your 30s?
At the time, but remember, I came from the trading desk where I had full discretion since I was 24.
Yeah.
So I was used to that. In fact, so Mike Berman, who was Max's right-hand guy and was running fixed income for Max, said, well, why would I do that? And I said, well, you do it with all your traders. He goes, you're right, good point. So yes, you could do it. So I was basically running my own company, a commercial real estate lending company with their money, and then I hired people, and I built that business from zero. By the end of in that very first year, from a standing start, we were a large lender in the United States.
Oh, I remember reading about it in the 90s when I was just getting into real estate.
And by the second year, we were a large lender by volume in the history of the United States. So from a standing start, like there was no one there, I was able to build this monster company. And it was all because I got a few things right. I hit the void. I filled the void very well, but I think that I got some of the good ideas about how to run a business, how to treat people well. There's some basic kind of things.
Well, you're very process oriented, but there was much more to it than that. You had to get the customer interested in originating this type of a loan. This categorically was different than a bank loan or an insurance company loan.
Here's the thing.
It's like debt funds today.
So here's the thing. You can't be an agent of change unless there's turmoil and collapse. Because until there's turmoil or collapse, nobody wants to change their behavior.
Right.
So the only reason I was successful is because there were no other options. Like I would come to people and say, here's the new loan docs, and they look a lot like bond type tight documents. And they would say, well, this isn't what our loans look like. And I was like, okay, well, do you want money or not? And they didn't have another option. So it's like they took it and it became industry standard.
But you guys took the risk on the paper.
We owned the loans.
You owned the loan.
And then we held them until we had a critical mass to pool and then sell bonds back by. But we took risk. But in my career until that time, it was the least risk I'd ever taken. We were making brain dead, bulletproof loans and charging, literally crazy prices. I could have charged anything because people had no other options. So I never slept better at night with regards to risk profile than I did in those first few years. We had no competition.
And you also created, I'm going to call it some exciting noise around it in the sense that you had these epic events to support it.
Yeah, but I mean, that came about for two reasons. One is I had started my career at Drexel in the years that Michael Milken was really at the pinnacle of his success.
Were you at Drexel here or New York?
I was in New York.
New York, yeah.
But I was in mortgage-backed securities, and Drexel was a firm formed by the whole Milken way. And of course, as a young, ambitious man coming into Wall Street and Drexel at that time, it was hard not to be impressed by what Milken was doing and to pay careful attention to it and go like, well, there's something I could learn here. And when I got to this spot with no more as backing, I realized that I was doing for commercial real estate very much the same as what Michael Milken was doing for borrowers on the corporate side.
Yes.
Who had no bank access and no insurance company access. And he was bringing them to the bond market as I was bringing commercial real estate borrowers essentially to the bond market. And he was building a bridge between the bond market and his borrowers as I did for commercial real estate. And I realized that one of the things he did that was very impressive was he would have these annual conferences. And the annual conferences were aimed to get people who didn't necessarily naturally know each other or socialize, but so people on different sides of the bridge that he owned, the borrower and the lender, the bond buyer and the corporate guy, so Steve Wynn, for example, or Ted Turner were guys who didn't have access to traditional loans and came to Milken and depended upon Milken to fund their growing businesses.
And look at those businesses and how much
incredible,
they cost.
Right? And so, but if not for Mike Milken, they would never have been successful. And what Mike Milken saw in them, he said, listen, I believe in you. I think your businesses are great. I think the banks are making a big mistake to not back you. I'll put you in front of all these bond buyers and I'll help you tell your story to them, and then I'll help them get to know you socially at my conferences, and there'll be trust developed because trust is essential.
It's everything.
Right? So he had these conferences that created trust, and around the trust, transactions were able to occur. And I never forgot that. And so when I found myself in a similar situation, I said, well, listen, I'm trying to bring all these real estate borrowers who are unknown to the bond buyer world, and the bond buyers who are unknown to the real estate people. There's no trust. I'm going to do what Milken did. I'm going to have these conferences. They're going to be epic parties, social opportunities for people and their wives. He didn't do that. I figured I'm going to take the Milken idea up a notch or two, and I'm going to include wives because I realized
you built a whole community around
that
it.
if you want to build trust, it's with the whole family, right? It creates a family. So if I get to know you and your wife, you get to know me and my wife. Trust is amped up to another level at that point. Not only that, but the wife is at home, who generally had been excluded up until then from all of her husband's fun business stuff, and she now loves me. So I have a salesman at home saying, you better do business with Ethan this year because I want to go to his party next year.
Now I've got your secret.
Yeah. So I thought of all those things, and I said, I'm gonna implement this better than Milken, but informed by what Milken did, because I'm pursuing a very similar path.
Why do you think, Milken was so successful, but yet the society around him, shall we say, didn't fully appreciate and led to partly his demise? I mean, I'm trying to think of the right way to put it.
Well, I'll never...
It's almost like the Japanese philosophy: if the nail gets too big, you bang it down.
Yeah. Well, I think that another very important lesson, because then in the 90s, all of a sudden, I found myself being compared to Milken. I was the Milken of the 90s, or the Milken of real estate. And I learned another very important lesson in observing the Milken story. Milken flew very high. And when you fly very high, you make enemies of people who don't even know you. They're just jealous of you, right?
This is what I'm saying.
And what Milken did, and ultimately got convicted of, I would say, we know in business, there's white and black, and then there's gray.
Sure there is.
Right? And so if you're nobody, and nobody really cares about you, you could operate in the gray, and you'd probably be fine.
Right.
But if you're a super high profile person, and you're in the gray, there's going to be a day that's not going to be so good for you. Yeah. Mike Milken was in the gray, and not the black, the gray. And the lesson I learned from him is, if I'm going to pursue this path and be that Mike Milken type figure of the 90s in real estate, the lesson I've learned from Milken is I have to be very white, always be in the white, right? And be far from the gray. Not only far from the black, but far from the gray. And I think that served me, that lesson, observation of what Milken did served me very well, because I definitely incurred a lot of envy because of my success. And it was unpleasant, I didn't do anything to deserve it. As you know, I'm a pretty nice guy, And all I did was keep my head down and just try to help people, which I did, and do a good job and get paid well for it. But Wall Street especially, but the world is filled with envy.
It is.
And people will trash talk you who don't even know you. And I mean, it manifests itself in really bad and painful and unpleasant ways. One day, the Wall Street Journal, some writer from the Journal called me, and he said, listen, I just want to give you a heads up. We're coming out with an article about you and how you have a secret bank account in the Cayman Islands, and you've been funneling money illegally there and buying bonds with Barry Sternlichter. I don't know, some crazy story. Crazy. So I said, first of all, I've never been to the Cayman Islands. I have no bank account outside of
you don't have time to go to the Cayman Islands.
Here's the only bank I have a bank account at, and if you want, you can call my banker. I have no other bank account. He goes, well, we're still going to run the story. I said, there's no truth to it. It's like literally 100% made up. I said, well, let me ask you a question.
This is you talking to
I'm talking to the writer. I said, did you get this from one of my competitors? He goes, yes, I did. I said, so you're getting it from one of my competitors.
Consider your source.
I'm telling you, there's no truth to it at all. And he said, well, we're still going to run it. So I literally had to have our head PR guy call like the publisher at the Wall Street Journal saying, we're going to sue you if you run this article. And they back down. But that kind of stuff is just unpleasant.
Yeah. Well, the great thing is that you've taken those kind of circumstances in your life and you've been able to reflect on them in a very honest way and grow from them and share that with other people. That's an amazing quality.
I'm very blessed to have had all those experiences at a young age and in a very aware state. And another lesson is, Mike Milken himself said this to me. He says, when you're dispensing capital, there's no shortage of friends. and of course, what that really
means, he has a lot of friends, by the way.
Of course, what that really means is there are very few real friends, right?
Yeah.
And so when I left Wall Street and I met my wife, Marisol, we moved to Hawaii, as you know, and disconnected from my whole life, right? And I figured I need a break, because this break's going to allow me to come back and see who's my friend and who was my friend because I was dispensing capital, right?
Had you been spending time in Hawaii before you decided to make the move
I had been to Hawaii before, but and we had been in Hawaii together 6 months before we decided to buy a place there, and we just fell in love with it, the Big Island. It just seemed like a perfect place to, recover from kind of a roller coaster journey.
It was your version of Elba, right?
It was a little bit like Elba. Exactly. It was my Elba. A lot prettier than Elba. Yeah. I think
a little bit bigger.
Yeah. Golf courses. I don't think Elba had golf courses.
No, I think it worked well for you. And you and I crossed paths about 20 years ago when I was a young acquisition officer at Kennedy Wilson.
Yeah.
And you had met one of your also early mentors, Bill McMorrow, I think, either in the business or
Bill and I, Bill, as you know, Kennedy
one of
Wilson,
my mentors as well.
Kennedy Wilson, in its earliest form, were one of the largest selling agents on behalf of the RTC.
Yes.
And so I met Bill when he was trying to move his business from being a selling agent for distressed sales to becoming a principal. And I always liked Bill, and we became friends. And then after my little hiatus from work, but before Hawaii, I kind of thought I really want to come back to work, and I don't want to move back to New York. I would rather do it on the West Coast. I had 2 kids from my first marriage, and they were living in San Diego with their mom. And I thought, if I could live somewhere in Southern California, that would be perfect. And so I thought, who do I know in Southern California that I would enjoy spending time with at work? And Bill was at the top of the list. So I kind of came into Bill's office, and he didn't know what I was coming to talk about. And I said, listen, you have a rather small company. It was a $60 million market cap company, public company. And I said, but I think you have the kind of pieces of the puzzle to really turn this into something special. And I told him kind of what I would do if I'd like to come in, I'd be interested in coming and being your partner. And he said, without even hesitating, he goes, you want to be president? And I said, sure. So that's how that happened. And I started there, as you know, and 6 months later, I think I left. I love Bill, but the reality was, it was Bill's baby, right?
Yes, it was.
And I kind of felt, I'm a very intuitive person, and I care about my friends, and he's a friend, and he's always been a friend. And so I felt him being sad, because the center of gravity of activity started to move away from him in his own company and into me and my office.
Yeah.
And I felt like there was a sadness in him. And so I walked into his office and I said, hey, listen, I feel like you're sad, and I didn't come here to make you sad. I came here to be a win-win. And if it's not a win-win, then I shouldn't be here. And if you want the keys to the car back, it's your car, man, and I appreciate you gave me a chance to sit in the front seat with you, and he said, well, I really appreciate you saying that, and I really do feel that's true. And I said, well, I'd rather be your friend than be in a bad business partnership with you.
But despite the fact that it was a short stint, and I know firsthand because I was there during the early years and to the modern years when the company went public a second time, you were a change agent in that short time you were there.
I think I planted the seeds for everything or a lot of what happened from there, and I'm very pleased to have made that contribution. I would have liked to make a little money in the process, but maybe I should have just bought some of the stock, I have only myself to blame.
So let's fast forward a little bit to, not today, but to the kind of the next major milestone in your career. You became I guess, the founder of a division of CBRE.
Yeah.
And was that through your connection with Chris Luderman, or how did that all evolve?
Well, I had friends there, but Brett White, who was the CEO, was the person there that I was closest with. And I just felt in 2007, because I had been my whole career so intimately involved with the securitization piping that permeated the financial system globally and had taken it over, I knew that what was going on Wall Street in securitization, particularly in the subprime side, but also in the commercial real estate side, that the credit quality of the originations, that were being pumped into the world system in the form of bonds was very poor credit quality, very, very poor.
This is at sort of the cusp of the GFC?
2005, 2006, 2000, that period, that vintage was garbage, credit-worthy garbage, okay? And I knew that because the system, it pushed these loans into the hinterlands, like, so you would find, subprime loans made in, Fountain Valley, their credit risk is now owned in some Osaka, Japan, and leveraged, right? So I knew how the system worked, and I knew that the system had been fed, almost unbeknownst to it, bonds that were backed by very bad loans that were ultimately going to collapse. And with a lot of leverage too. So when you put a lot of leverage on stuff that's going to go bad, you can lose everything. So I knew in 2007 how bad things were going to get. In fact, I had predicted that there'd be at least one major Wall Street firm that would disappear.
So
I didn't know which one.
You saw it coming.
I saw it coming.
From the debt side.
I knew what was going to happen. And so I went to Brett, not to get a job. We were just going to play golf at LA Country Club, and it was the week before Christmas, 2007. And he said to me, he called me and he said, hey, it was going to be me and him and two other guys playing golf. And he said, can you just meet me for lunch? He goes, you're my smartest financial friend, and I don't understand what's going on in the world today. I would love for you to spend an hour just with me, giving me your view of what's going on. So I met him for lunch before golf, told him what I thought was going to happen, and I told him what I thought CBRE could do to take advantage of opportunities that are going to come from this dislocation. And by probably the 12th hole, he asked me if I would come work there and build a business in response to that and take advantage of that opportunity. And I told him, well, I really don't want to work for a 35,000 person public company, but since you're the CEO, if you created an entrepreneurial island for me to operate, I would do it. And so he did. And I was the only person in the history of the firm who owned a part of the business, his business, right? So I owned, I was the only one. I'm the only one since or before. So I owned about a third of my business. And it was an entrepreneur's deal. They put up the money to build the business. They owned 2/3 of it. I put it together and worked it and owned a third of it.
You were shareholders with them.
I was shareholders with them. And I thought that would be a wonderful platform for me to be partners with and build a great company. That was my dream, right? So I felt, this place feels right. And the more time I spent at CBRE, the more I saw I ran into great people, and it reinforced my sense that this company is magic, right? This company has so much opportunity for a guy like me, coming from a kind of a principal finance place. They didn't have me, and I didn't have them, and it was a very good combination. And in a very short period of time, I built the most profitable division of CBRE Investors, and it was small, but it was very profitable and very successful.
And that business still goes on today, I believe.
It does. And then Brett left under corporate circumstances, as corporate circumstances can be. And I found myself without a kind of a godfather, you know? And now I found myself in a 35,000 person company without a friend who's the CEO. So it was a different situation, Yeah. And I like the people, like the guy who took over as CEO, and he and I are still friends to this day.
Yeah.
He put a guy in to be my nominal boss, and let's just say he made me an offer that I had to refuse.
Oh God!
Yeah, he made me an offer I had to refuse.
Yeah.
And it was very sad, because I really had hopes to build something great there, and I like to say, I thought I was going to be there and build something very big and long lasting, and instead it was successful but very small and very short lasting.
But it was still fun. CBRE was a great run for you. Another reinvention of yourself.
Yes.
Where you pioneered something. You're a founding executive of that enterprise. And now you're about to do it again, this time in the high yield lending space, and forming Mosaic as a construction lender.
Yeah, I didn't think of starting a construction lender, Bob. again, being the entrepreneur, I wanted to start a new company. After the CBR experience, I wanted to work for myself and not be subject to the vagaries of corporate politics and all that stuff. And I wanted to be in better control of my destiny than being part of a big company. So I started Mosaic in, I guess, 2015, the very beginning of 2015.
Yes.
And I asked myself that same question, like, what needs to be done that's not getting done? What opportunities exist today in real estate investing that I think make sense? Now, it's interesting, very few people know what I'm about to tell you. What I really liked most in 2015 was owning apartment buildings. So what I wanted to do was be an apartment building owner. Now, I had never been an apartment building owner, right? I'm a financier, really, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I understand macro.
That's your core background.
That's my core background.
Yeah.
But I also, I finance. I know a lot about apartments and every other property type, but I never operated apartment buildings. But I wanted to be. I felt that the best risk-adjusted return in 2015 was the equity ownership of apartment buildings. And the reason I thought that, which by the way, I still think to this very day is true, and I have the same reason for it. Two reasons. Three. One, I thought economic uncertainty is a big deal in the world. And I thought that in 2015, and I think it's even more so today.
Well, the GFC was still in our minds.
Right, and we were still limping along and surviving really only because of the Fed and only because of gimmicked interest rates, right? And so I thought economic vibrancy doesn't exist. We're limping along. There's a lot of economic uncertainty. I don't want to own traditional commercial real estate, which is dependent upon economic vibrancy. I want to own apartments where even in tough times, people still have to live, right? And so that was reason number one. Reason number two, I'm probably telling you things you all know, you know better than me, but for me, reason number two was I felt that the biggest losses in real estate typically occur not being able to refinance your loans because
it always comes from the
because
debt
the
side.
financing market shut down, right?
Right.
Well, apartments benefit from government participation, so that doesn't have that risk. Like Fannie and Freddie, you're always going to be supporting housing in this country, and so you don't have that same dependence that you do in commercial real estate, where you're dependent upon that light switch being on and off, right? You don't have that same problem with apartments.
Well, our government, which is different than a lot of countries, has a mandate
to support
creating
housing.
and supporting
Exactly.
housing. It's been around since the 1930s.
So I felt that was the reason number two. And then reason number three, I felt that, and this is going back to 2015, and I only feel what I'm about to say is even more true today. There's no way out of our debt conundrum, no way out except by debasing our currency, which is another way of saying inflation, okay? Devaluing our currency. And multifamilies are the best protection if you're going to invest in anything against the risks associated with debasement.
Well, there's more durability of cash flow, I think.
There is.
Than most.
And of course, rents reset much more frequency, durability of cash flow. So I felt for those three reasons in 2015, I want to go out and build an apartment business, much like you have done so successfully.
Thank you.
And I went to my first investor, who was Tony Robbins, the
motivational speaker.
And Tony said, "Yeah, I'll put $5 million in whatever you're doing." And I said, "Great."
How did you get to know him? Sidebar.
Through my wife, Marisol. Marisol was in her life a world-class athlete and became a very super successful and famous personal trainer, and at a time was his personal trainer and became very good friends with him and his whole family. And I became friends with him and his family through my wife. And so he said, "Yeah, I'll put $5 million in. It's whatever you're doing, sure." He goes, "But you need to talk to my RIA." Now, I didn't know what RIA stood for in 2015. So I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "My wealth advisor," or whatever. I said, "Fine." So he steered me to a guy who lived in San Diego, because he had once lived in San Diego, and
right.
I went down to San Diego to meet with his RIA, And I'm sitting here at his office, explaining him the thesis for apartments, just like I did to you. And he said, well, that all sounds great. And of course, I'll give you the $5 million from Tony for that. I'll approve that. But he goes, do you know anything about real estate debt? He asked me that, right? I go,
really?
And I said, yeah, I do, right? I mean,
just out of the blue.
He didn't know who I was. He didn't know I invented real estate debt, right? He goes, yeah, I know something about real estate debt.
Yeah, I'm the founding father of CMBS.
Yeah, I know something about real estate. He goes, well, if you had a debt fund, I would not only give you Tony's $5 million, but I'd give you another $25 million. I said, well, I didn't tell you about the debt fund, but we have a debt fund. So the multifamily became a debt fund in that meeting. Okay.
You seized the moment.
Seize the moment. I was like,
diem.
Carpe diem. Like, okay, God wants me to have a debt fund. We're going to have a debt fund, right? And that was the end of the multifamily plan and the beginning of the debt fund plan.
Oh my God.
So now I have a debt fund, and I also started to think, well, I didn't know what an RIA was, but this is pretty fertile ground for raising money.
Yeah.
So I started to kind of work my way into the world of RIAs.
Yeah.
Which was challenging because, they were new to real estate and private markets, and it required a heavy lift on my part. But over the course of the next 2.5 years, I probably had 500 RIA meetings.
Wow.
And I closed 130 different RIAs into my fund.
Yeah, and they don't come in instantaneously.
And they come in small. Right?
Yeah, and you have to work them.
And I did. So I traveled a lot for 2.5 years, and I developed relationships with a lot of them and closed 130 RIAs into that fund. But
how big was the fund?
It ended up, it was open-ended, so it was growing.
Ah.
But before COVID hit, it was up to about $550 million, which is a good first-time fund. And we were growing at about 30 or million a month or more, and then COVID came, and that was the end of that fund, really. Not the performance, but the, once
new money.
Yeah, new money wasn't coming in at COVID time. Okay,
no, it wasn't coming in anywhere.
No, and nor should it have, by the way.
Had you placed all the capital?
So here's the thing. So I started down this debt fund because of the first investor. And my heart really wasn't into debt because I was into apartments. I wanted to go apartments because that's where I thought was the best return. Now I had to figure out, well, what in debt is worth doing? But the debt markets, even in 2015, but even increasingly so with each passing year, which is overcrowded with capital, as you knew.
Sure.
And so the risk-adjusted returns were terrible. People were, it was just overrun with capital.
The debt returns were beaten down.
Oh, terrible. So I had to find a strategy within the debt world that was underserviced.
Yeah.
And I found that construction lending was underserviced because people perceive risk. The word construction lending sounds scary, right?
Well, that and the banks had their limits.
Yeah,
they had to participate loans and.
So I swung hard towards construction lending, but you'll find this amusing. I still loved the apartment trade, but I couldn't do it. So how do I do an apartment ownership in a debt fund? So I started to do high leverage preferred equity on apartment deals.
Right.
And so I got the exposure to apartment ownership in a debt fund through creative.
Well, I think that's how you and I connected not too long ago on a deal in Florida.
Yeah, that's right.
You had that position.
Correct. Yeah. And we did that deal and it turned out great.
And you made it happen.
And it really turned out great. Yeah. So my fund ended up being a barbell of construction lending on new construction and high leverage preferred equity on multifamilies because I still had that multifamily, inclination that I wanted to incorporate into my exposure. It was a really good run,
almost 8 years.
Yeah, it was really good. We built a nice company. COVID came, and they say man plans and God laughs, and you have to be able to roll with the punches, And I think that the business that we built, the way we built it, right? It was an open-ended fund. It was dependent upon raising money every month. And all of a sudden we run into this COVID wall. Well, that structural plan wasn't going to work anymore.
Well, it takes the fun out of it.
Took a lot of the fun out of it. And I also, I've been around long enough, as you have, to know that we had never seen a global pandemic before.
No.
But whenever things like those things happen, it tends to result in periods of extreme illiquidity. Markets shut down, right? And I didn't know why or what, but I thought in a global pandemic, the risk of global illiquidity and the effect on real estate values could be very bad. And so I wanted to exit. I just wanted out. I wanted a clean break.
Fear is a big debilitator.
So I wanted to move as fast as I can to protect my investors and get them out. Which nobody, look, I had permanent capital. It was an open-ended fund. But, you know, I'm not that kind of guy, right?
So why sit at the party when you could protect the investor?
I want to protect the investor. And I figured if I wanted to go raise another fund, I would be remembered and appreciated for being disciplined.
You would, because you weren't just worried about your own platform and the fee income from it.
So I started to find creative ways to gain liquidity for my investors. And then I did something ultimately that I don't think anyone I know has ever done before, is I merged an open-ended fund, debt fund, into a publicly traded mortgage REIT.
Ready Capital.
Ready Capital. And I got that deal agreed to and priced in the spring of 2021 and took about 8 months to close from the day we shook hands, because that's how...
So Ready was already a going concern.
Oh, they've been around for many years.
I don't know.
And I knew the founders of Ready. Oddly enough, both of them had worked at Nomura after a long career at Merrill Lynch. So I knew them well. They're seasoned veterans like you and me, steady hands. They had built a very nice company. And I got my investors no lockup liquidity, meaning they could sell or they can keep the stock. And either way, it was better than I think what I was giving them in my fund, which was smaller with less liquidity, lower dividend yields, and a lot of idiosyncratic risk that I didn't feel I wanted them to take.
And you were able to offload that risk by putting it into a bigger entity with other...
Yeah. And also the ability to sell the shares immediately if they wanted to get out,
right?
Which they couldn't do in my fund. There was no liquidity. Public REIT. So that was the end of that fund, and I would say the series of funds that we had at Mosaic. And Mosaic, we had about I think we had 3 other separate accounts, institutional separate accounts that added up to another $400 or $500 million. And so that continued and continues to this day. With some legacy assets, but it's winding up a bit, you know, and I kind of feel like time to reinvent myself again.
Well, it's only been 4 decades since the invention started. So here we are, 4 decades have gone by, and now you're, you know, seasoned veteran entering your 6 decades of life on the great planet Earth. And you seem to still be hungry for personal growth. You haven't stopped. You've been lecturing, I know, at Pepperdine.
Yeah.
And I think, where's the other school now?
USC.
USC, that little school down the street.
Yeah.
And you've decided to collect your thoughts in this really great book that I've enjoyed reading, Greatness is a Choice by Ethan Penner. And it's kind of a manifesto on life. And you have Tony Robbins here, who's written the foreword, along with Julius Erving and others that have endorsed the book. And it's really an easy read, but it's very philosophical. And I think it's a great accumulation of your personal wisdom that's put forth in a very constructive way for people.
Thank you.
And it has a very positive message to it. So how would you describe, when you delve into the book, and summarize kind of the importance of this interconnectivity among everything from economics to ideology to nature to death to life?
Well, I think that, and this is a very important message, if you will, to share with people, particularly young people starting out their career. You know this very well because you also have lived 6+ decades. You know, what does it mean to be a great real estate man or woman? What does it mean to be a really good investor in anything, really? And the answer is, real estate is only as successful as the society that it's sitting in, right? I mean, you could have the prettiest building. We're sitting in a beautiful building in Century City right now. But if the surrounding economy, you know, in this area were to go down hard, you know, really hard, this beautiful building would be worth far less than it's worth in a better
No, you'd be on an island.
And so you can't just, to be in real estate, you've got to pay attention to the whole world.
Well, you're building a better community.
Yeah.
Around you.
Yeah. You have to pay attention. I like to say, like, one of the lessons I learned, I'll share this with you and your audience. It's one of the most kind of amazing observations I've had. In 2007, you probably know this, but it's worth mentioning. In 2007 was the largest year to that date in the history of the U.S. real estate market in volume of acquisitions.
Of transactions.
Transactions.
Yeah.
Volume of funding, volume of loans, volume of acquisitions, transactions, right?
On a time-adjusted basis, I assume.
No, ever. Up until that day. Up until that day.
In whole dollars.
In whole dollars up until that day. And what we all know is that by March of 2008, every person who bought something or financed something looked in the rearview mirror and said, I wish I didn't do that. Like, every deal sucked in retrospect. And it only was a few months later, right? So you have to ask yourself, how is it that an industry could have gotten it so wrong, right? And this is not an industry of dummies. Like, there are dummies like there are in every industry, but there's also plenty of smart people in this industry. And yet, an industry batted 0, on its highest volume year ever. Like, that's a pretty astounding thing. And so what I found interesting, and I still to this day do, is how little retrospection there was. Like, you probably have never heard that question asked.
No.
And it's never asked. And it's like, okay, how is it not asked? Like, the industry batted 0 on its biggest volume year ever. How does that even happen? How do you explain that? And I think the answer is, and I've asked myself that question, is this industry, like many industries, is populated by professionals who are very focused on their task. So if you're an acquisitions person, you're out there trying to make the best acquisitions possible.
Siloed, you're saying.
You're siloed. Very few people are looking at the big, what I call the big picture. Like, how's the world look, right? Is it shaky? How does the world financial system look? Is it shaky? How does the socioeconomic world look? Is it shaky?
Geopolitics.
Geopolitics, is it shaky? And could that shakiness undermine what I'm doing in my daily siloed job, okay? I remember when I started off as a mortgage-backed securities trader at Drexel, because it's always been with me. I don't know, I can't explain why. But one day I said to myself, well, gee, this is great. Like, I'm buying and selling things. On my say-so at 24 years old, we're wiring 20 million here, 100 million there, 50 million here. And one day I said to myself, I'm 24, I go like, where's all this money coming from? And what can go wrong to make this money unavailable to me? Because that's the risk to my career. Like, I'm good at what I'm doing, but if something up here above me
the music stops.
Goes wrong and the music stops, well, no matter how good I am at what I'm doing, my game's over. So I started to ask the question, what am I dependent upon above me, right? And I started to get out of my silo a little bit and started to look at the bigger picture. I would encourage everyone, young and old alike, to think that way, because in 2007, I think too few, if any, in our industry were thinking that way.
Yeah, I think it's hard because I think you are right. There is a certain siloed nature to it. It's very task-oriented, head down, and it's a rare person, I think, that can see in 360
Well, I was very fortunate to start my career on a bond trading desk, because the news was happening in front of me all day. And so, like, I never had to, like, when I read the Wall Street Journal, when I was on Wall Street, I would never read it because it was yesterday's news. I saw it all happening in my world, like in my trading desk.
Like, it's almost like trading commodities.
It was happening,
on a
right?
spot basis.
So if you're reading the Wall Street Journal, so think about this. If you're reading the Wall Street Journal and making a trade because of something you read, think about the whole market already traded on it yesterday, okay? Yeah. Think about that.
Or if you saw a stock on Kramer,
it already happened.
It already happened.
You missed it.
You missed it. Exactly. But I did enjoy, there were some really, really great chapters in this book, but I just wanted to highlight a couple that I really enjoyed what you had to say. And I think you and I share the same philosophy. the title of the chapter is "Work is Not a Four-Letter Word." I'm going to just read a little bit of it. Too many people have had a poor understanding of our hostility for the concept of work, and that's very true. Most people see work as a necessity for survival and not a potential source of joy and fulfillment well beyond the financial rewards that it might bring us. One of the most valuable lessons I've learned in that service for the benefit of others is through your work, is the key to nurturing something that has long felt like drudgery into the prime source of genuine happiness and personal fulfillment. My saying in response to that is it's the process that counts. When you create an environment where people enjoy
it has to be
the workflow,
the
and
daily
community around
the hourly experience has to be joyous.
Yes, exactly.
Because that's life. Those are hours passing by, you know.
And I think you did that clearly at Nomura.
I did really well, yeah.
Yeah, you did, because it was an epic run. So, what I guess when you look back a little bit, and in also in light of your personal journey, I mean, you're a father of, I think, 5 children.
Yeah.
One was adopted, and I heard in another instance your story about, is it Everest?
Yes, he's my youngest.
Yeah, your youngest, and he was adopted, I guess, from Ethiopia as a malnourished young boy, and he had some challenges. I share this with you because I adopted a baby from China myself with my wife 18 years ago, and I know what it takes to do that. But how did that journey start, and how did you respond to the challenges you had with Everest?
Well, we actually have 2 adopted children. So,
you do?
Yeah,
Okay.
so when I first met Marisol, we had our baby daughter, Juliana, who is now 21, but she'll always be my baby. One of Marisol comes from a big family, and she had she has a nephew who at the time was 14 years old, and would visit her often. She was living in San Diego at the time. She was training Tony Robbins, for example, and in San Diego.
Okay.
And that's how we met. She was in San Diego, and I had a house in La Jolla, and we met that way. And her 14-year-old nephew, biologically born to her oldest sister, but divorce, father ended up with cancer. He didn't really have parents. His mother traveled a lot for work, unsettled home situation.
Yeah.
He always loved Marisol, and he would visit her every summer in the United States. And he met me, and so we decided to raise him and adopt him. So even though technically he's our nephew, he's been our son.
He's part of your family.
Since 14. He's now 35. He's an amazing child. So adopting Everest wasn't hard because we had already been with our first adopted boy for so long, and we also felt that he would be a wonderful role model and make Everest's entry into our family and into the United States easier, because he walked those steps before Everest did, right? And could be a big mentor for Everest. And
How old is Everest now?
Everest is 15 now.
Okay, so he's in high school.
He is. He's in 9th grade.
Oh my God, you've got plenty to do there.
Yeah. Well, as you know, parenting never stops at any age, it seems.
No, it doesn't. We worry all the time. Well, Ethan, it's been great seeing you, and having you here, and I think we've learned a lot through this interview, and I think there's more growth ahead for you and for the world around you.
I mean, we're all alive, and as long as we're breathing, we should be doing something to kind of contribute to the lives of others and to improve ourselves, right? What else are we here for?
And that's evident in the book, and I hope you all will get it. It's published by Wiley, and it's called Greatness is a Choice by Ethan Penner.
Thank you very much. Really love being with you. Thanks.
Thanks, Ethan.